Hi, I'm Beverly Harzog. Welcome to my session, Confessions of a Credit Junkie. Have any of you ever seen the movie Confessions of a Shopaholic? It's also a book. You may have even read the book, but I'm betting that a few of you have. A couple of years ago, I was watching this movie with my daughter, and it was just wildly funny. The star is Becky Bloomwood, who was a finance journalist who is just a shopaholic. I mean, she goes out and she spends tons of money. She can't resist a sale on boots. And it's extra funny because this woman is a finance journalist and she can't seem to get a grip on her own finances. Well, I thought it was pretty funny. But about halfway into this movie, I stopped laughing. Do you want to know why? Because I used to be Becky Bloomwood. I did. I was. When I first got out of college, I didn't know anything about credit cards, okay? And I proceeded to turn into a credit card disaster. And so the name of this session, Confessions of a Credit Junkie, that's actually also the name of my new book. The full title, Confessions of a Credit Junkie, Everything You Need to Know to Avoid the Mistakes I Made. And it's funny because after I saw that movie, Confessions of a Shopaholic, I decided that I wanted to go public with my story. I thought it could help a lot of people. So today I went from being a credit card disaster years ago, and today I'm a credit card expert and author of a new book. So there was a happy ending, but I want to share, some anecdotes about what I went through because I don't want this to happen to you. I really don't. It was a terrible, terrible thing to go through. I ended up in terrible debt. In my book, I start out with the biggest mistakes I made, and I just want to share a couple of them with you, just to give you an idea. So first we'll talk about that, and then I'll get into some more specifics about the way you can use credit cards to actually save money when you understand how to operate them. So the first thing that I did wrong when I first got out of college was I started getting all of these credit card offers, and these days you're going to start getting them while you're in college. You may have already gotten some, and I encourage you, don't apply for any of these cards. If there's anything that interests you or you have questions, talk to your parents or talk to an adult that you trust who can help you, okay? But don't just sit down and apply for these cards. Now, I didn't know better, all right? So I'd get these cards, and on the envelope, it would say fabulous things like, you've earned this card. You deserve it. And so I bought into this hype. I thought, yes, I do deserve this. Well, I got 7 credit cards. I proceeded to max out all of my cards and ended up in debt. So my first mistake was just applying for cards, not knowing anything about them and not reading any of the fine print, which leads me into another mistake, not reading the fine print. Now, you'll find that when you start getting these offers and you start looking at them, these offers are written by lawyers, okay? So you can get online and you can see the features of the card, how great they are, okay? But the fine print, the thing that tells you what your interest rate will be and what your fees will be and what the penalty rate will be, and that's the rate you pay if you're late, okay, which can be around 30%, I'm not kidding. That part is written by lawyers, and it's very, very difficult to understand. So in my book, I devote a lot of time to just making the fine print sound easy. And that wasn't easy, trust me. But my mission, I really want consumers to stay out of trouble with cards. I want consumers to understand what they're getting into with cards. And like I said earlier, they can be a good thing. You can use them to build good credit, but it can be awful if you don't know what you're doing. And you can't possibly know what you're doing if you don't read the fine print. All right, and while you're young and just starting out, you need somebody to guide you through this. So another thing I did was I wasn't paying my bills on time. This is a big no-no, okay? You've got something called a FICO score. And when you don't pay your bills on time, the banks don't like that. And they report you to credit bureaus. And the credit bureaus give information to a company called FICO, okay, and they have an algorithm that calculates your credit score. Now, if you don't pay your bills on time, it looks very bad in your FICO score. Your score goes down and down. Now, that might not seem like a big deal while you're in college, but you really do not want to ruin your credit score while you're in college, and I'll tell you why. As soon as you get out of college and you decide you want to get your own apartment or buy a car, having good credit will help you get started in your new life. Okay, and that seems like a long way away now, but believe me, it's not. It will go by so fast. You'll be shocked. And if you have a bad credit score, you're going to pay more for your car. Okay, unless you have cash, in which case, congratulations. But if, like, most people will get a car loan, and if you do get a loan, you're going to have to pay an interest rate. And people with bad credit scores pay a whole lot more than people who have great credit scores. So that right there is just one example. It's difficult to rent an apartment if you don't have a good credit score. If you have a bad credit score, they're really going to look at you funny, like, I'm not sure you can pay the rent, are you reliable, are you responsible? So these are just some of the things that would go through, a landlord's mind when they're trying to think about whether or not they want to rent a house or an apartment to you. So, these are just a couple of reasons why, and I bet you didn't know this, but your insurance, I mean, your mom and your dad pay for this now, but your car insurance and your health insurance, a lot of the rates are based on what your credit score is. So if you have a bad credit score, you're going to pay more for insurance. So, I just want to give you an idea of really how important it is not to mess up with credit cards when you're young, because right away you're going to feel the pain. Trust me on that. Now, you're probably wondering, why didn't I pay my bills on time? Well, at the time, I was young and inexperienced with money. And you want to hear something funny? I was an accountant. I was actually a CPA when all this happened to me. I majored in accounting in college. And so one reason why Confessions of a Shopaholic struck a nerve with me is because, like I said, I was Becky Bloomwood. I was, a CPA. This wasn't supposed to happen to me. I was smart and educated, but it can happen to anyone because personal finances are very, very different from corporate finance. So the reason, I wasn't paying my bills on time is because, frankly, I ran out of money. I had more month than money. So I had expenses and my cash flow was no longer covering it because I maxed out my credit cards. Now, I was single at the time. This was very, very scary. It's a scary, scary, place to be when you're not sure you can pay your bills. So I didn't see the problem in skipping a little bit. And honestly, I had no idea I was trashing my credit score at the time. So I was just kind of rolling along, paying what I could. So that's how you get into trouble, okay? That's how you ruin your score. And how did I max out all these cards? I wasn't tracking my spending at all, okay? I would go out shopping, like Becky Bloomwood from Confessions of a Shopaholic. I saw boots I wanted, I'd buy those boots. I had a job in a corporate office, and I felt like I needed designer clothes and expensive shoes, and all the nice accessories that go with those things. And it's kind of a trap when you start thinking that you need all these things. It becomes kind of emotional too. Like you're thinking, oh, I need this great looking suit to impress my colleagues at work. I need great shoes to do well at this meeting. I'm not kidding. It can just kind of snowball. For me, it even snowballed over into vacation, where I felt like I had to have a nice vacation. I once went on a cruise when I had very little money in the bank. I mean, it was crazy. And at the time, I wasn't thinking ahead. I wasn't thinking about my credit score. I sure was not thinking about retirement. Okay, I wasn't worried about any of those things. And the thing is, when you track your spending, you know where your money's going. And it gives you power to choose how you want to spend your money. And this is a great thing for you to do now. I have a son in high school, and he has a job, and and bank accounts, and he tracks his expenses through Mint.com. We all use it at my house, but there's other good ones too. Manila's good. There are many options out there. I like Mint because I'm a visual person, and so I like to see pie charts and graphs, stuff like that. It helps keep me in line. I get emails if I'm about to max out one of my categories. On my credit cards, I never do that anymore. I'm very strict about it. But I have categories set up. I like to eat out. That's probably my biggest weakness. So I meant to have a restaurants category. And when I start approaching that category, I get an email from Mint that says, stop it. You know, you're about to max out the restaurant category. So that's my signal that, okay, I've had fun eating out. It's over for the rest of the month. And it takes a little bit of self-discipline, but, you know, it all pays off in the end. Now, when you track your spending, you have power. I mentioned that before. It's a great feeling when you have power over your personal finances. Because you know what? If you want to sacrifice in one area, maybe you'll have money for those boots next month. But you can't do everything. That's how people get into trouble. And that's why tracking your spending is so important. Now, you know, along with not making my payments on time, another big, huge mistake I made was carrying a balance at all. Okay, now if you pay your balance in full by the due date, you don't pay any interest. Okay, and a lot of people will do this with credit cards. Experienced people with credit cards, they might buy something with a credit card because they have a rewards credit card. All right, so let's say they want to buy, you know, an Xbox, something like that. It's for $500. I happen to know this because my son wants one for Christmas. So maybe you use a rewards card, you know, and if it's a miles card, you get 500 miles. Sometimes you might get 1,000 miles, and that's something you can apply towards an airline ticket. So that's why people, you know, sometimes they'll use credit cards even when they have the money elsewhere. But they only do this if they're planning to pay that off by the due date. So what happens is you use the card, you get a statement the next month, and it tells you what the due date is. And so the amount of time in between when you make your purchase and you pay that bill off, that's called the grace period, okay? And so during that time, you get basically an interest-free loan. It sounds good, right? But it's only good if you pay that bill by that due date. If you're late, guess what? You can get hit with a penalty rate, okay, depending on how late you are. So let's say, you know, there are some student cards out there where you could get, I'll just say like 15% interest, all right? So let's say you've got 15% interest. You pay a bill late, maybe that goes up to 29%, okay? You see the problem here? So this is why it's so important to pay the bills on time, okay? And if you're carrying a balance and you have to be aware of that minimum payment, you're going to be paying interest, okay? There isn't a grace period. Once you start carrying a balance, you're going to pay interest. So let's say at the end of the month, let's say you've got $500 balance on your credit card. Well, until you make a payment the next month, you're paying interest on that. It's called compound interest. And I'm not going to bore you with the details on that, but let me just say it gets ugly in a hurry. Okay, so this is how a debt can start out, you know, kind of small like that, and it gets bigger and bigger, okay, until it's a giant, giant mess, okay. So once you carry balance, once you make the decision to do that, it's a slippery slope. So I just want to caution you about that. You know, one of the rules for responsible credit card behavior is don't carry a balance, okay. It's a good habit to get into now. And even if, you know, something bad happens, let's say something bad happens and you lose your part-time job, you know, it's not the end of the world as long as you still make that payment on time and you vow to pay it off the next month. Get a plan, have a plan, cut something else out of your budget if you have to pay that bill off. Make that your priority. Okay, I can recall when I started carrying a balance, I didn't have a proper shock reaction to anything. Honestly, it was, I thought, oh, well, no big deal. I'll just pay that off next month. Well, next month became the next month, which became the next month, and so forth. So just don't go there. Don't carry balance. Now, I talked earlier about maxing out my cards, and this is what happens when you carry a balance. When it starts growing, before you know it, you've maxed out your card. Now, you have a credit limit when you get a credit card. Your credit limit when you're starting out is going to be very high. Okay, it could be $500, $1,000. If you somehow have developed a credit history, let's say maybe you've been an authorized user on a parent's credit card, and you developed a fairly decent credit history for someone young, they might, take you up to $2,000. But keep in mind, this is the limit, and this is not what you're supposed to spend. Okay, in order to have a very good credit score, you don't want to spend more than 30% of your limit. Okay, so let's say, to make the math easy, let's say your credit limit is $1,000. You don't want to have a balance. You don't want to spend more than $300 in a month. Okay, even if you plan to pay the whole thing off. Okay, because that helps boost your credit score. There's a thing called a credit utilization ratio. This is the amount of credit that you have used compared to the amount you have available. And so that means if you spend, you buy things up to $300, that's the amount of credit you've used. The amount you have available is $1,000. Okay, so you want to keep that at 30%. And in fact, if you're really concerned about your score, let's say you're a senior in college and you want to be sure that you do whatever you can to maximize your score before you get out of college, you want to keep it closer to 10%. So that means you would keep it around $100 on a $1,000 limit. And that may seem like a small amount, but let's keep in mind that you're learning how to use credit cards during this time, and so it's a good practice just to keep that balance low. Okay, it's a good practice to do that, because as I mentioned earlier, a good credit score means better rates on insurance, car loans, interest rates, if you decide to buy a house later on, all kinds of things. So just, think ahead, and remember that you'll be paying for this stuff yourself someday, and you can really start out life on a really good foot if you've got a good credit score in place. Now, when I think back on, some of the mistakes I made, I think one of my biggest mistakes, and this is so common among all age groups, is going into denial. Okay, so if something happens and you find yourself carrying a balance, face up to it. Okay, talk to your parents, talk to a school counselor, talk to someone who can help you make a decision about how to proceed. Because, like I said, it can snowball in a hurry. There is no shame in asking for help. Okay, and if you're in a situation where you're not sure what to do next, always ask. Okay, always ask, because you don't want to get into trouble. Now, one thing that I always try to make clear is that you don't have to get a credit card. Okay, they're great tools to have if used responsibly, to build credit, and to profit from. I profit from my cards all the time, and I'll tell you a story about that in just a minute. But so it's great, but you know yourself pretty well. Your parents know you pretty well, better than anyone. Don't worry about what the experts say about what age is the appropriate age. You decide if you're ready. If you're not ready, I don't care if your best friend has a great credit card. You wait until you're ready. There is no pressure really at all. There are other options. You can be an authorized user on one of your parents' cards. And if you're at all uncomfortable with how things are going, if you have a credit card, put the card away, okay, and talk to your parents, and maybe being an authorized user is a better option for you, because when you do that, your parents can check in on you and check the accounts and just make sure everything's going okay. That might make you feel a little more secure. It's kind of like having a credit card on training wheels. Another option that's really good is called a secured credit card. Now, what this is you make a deposit. It's usually for just someone just starting out. I would say $200 or $300. You put the account in a bank account. The credit card issuer will tell you what bank to use, and that secures the credit card for you. And so what this means is then the bank will give you a credit card. It won't say secured on it. It looks just like any other credit card. And then you use that credit card just the way you would any other credit card. The money that's in the deposit account, that deposit stays there. You're actually using the card. You're actually using credit. So this is a good way for people who are just establishing credit, and also for people who are trying to rebuild credit. It's a great tool, a secured credit card. So that's something to keep in mind. Another option that some people take advantage of is to have a cosigner. There are some credit cards out there for students, and you can't have a cosigner. You have to be able to qualify for the card on your own. I think Citi has a couple of those cards. But in general, what this means is maybe a parent or someone else that you're close to decides to co-sign on that credit card with you. Now, this could be a bit of a sticky wicket. Honestly, I've seen situations like this where it did not go well. So you want to be very careful. You and your parents or whomever you're doing this with, you've got to sit down and have a heart-to-heart talk about how the card will be used. Because when you're both co-signed on a card, you're both legally liable for the debt. And if you go crazy with your credit card and don't pay your bills, or max the cards out and ruin your credit score, it also ruins the parent's credit score. So this is something that you have to pay really close attention to when you do something like this. Just you've got to talk it out and be sure you're both clear about what the dangers are. I know some parents that have done this and it's worked out just fine. I'm not saying it can't happen, but you just want to be very careful about how you proceed. So, back to being in denial for just a second, because there's just one more thing I wanted to cover on that, and then we'll move on. When I had my debt, I'll tell you a secret. I got into such terrible debt. I didn't know how much debt I was in. Okay, and then I stopped answering the phone. Okay, because debt collectors were calling me, just like in Confessions of a Shopaholic. Remember that sleazy looking guy that kept calling Rebecca Blueblood? Well, I had several of those trying to track me down. Now, you're going to find this hard to believe, but this was before caller ID, okay, which makes me sound old, I know. But I did have an answering machine, though. So there was no way with the phone rang, there was no way at that time to know who was calling me. I was young and single at the time, and dating, and so I would sit there and listen to the answering machine until I could find out who was calling. Okay, and I would delete it as soon as I could if it was a debt collector. But if it was someone I wanted to talk to, oh, you bet I picked up that phone. So I was in quite a bit of denial, and what knocked me out of it, you'll find as you get online and look at personal finance blogs or websites to learn more about finance, you'll find that people who have been in debt often talk about their rock bottom moment. I would say my rock bottom moment was I had a retail credit card, and I went into that store and I was in line to buy some Ralph Lauren jeans. Okay. So I get up to the cash register, I give her my card, and she goes, "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but your card has been denied." And I couldn't believe it. It was the first credit card I had ever gotten. It was a Riches card, which today is Macy's. That card sort of represented my ticket to freedom. And So I was really devastated that I had lost this card. And honestly, retail cards are pretty easy to get. So when you lose a retail credit card, you're in pretty bad shape. You have messed up big time at that point. So that was my rock bottom moment, I'd have to say. So that night, that shook me out of my denial, knocked me right out of it. So I went home and started going through my mail and started getting my life together. Started with reading everything I could find out about personal finance and credit. And at that point, then I left the CPA field and started becoming a finance journalist and specialized in credit because I didn't want people to make the same mistakes I did. So that's my credit card disaster to credit card diva story. So if it happens to you, and I hope it never ever does, don't go into denial. Take action immediately. Now, I mentioned that you could use credit cards to build good credit. And that assumes that you don't make any of the mistakes that I made, okay? And it's really a simple formula, okay? Once you get a credit card, you track your spending, you have a limit for how much you're going to spend, you pay the balance off by the due date in full, and you do that again the next month. Another thing that will affect your credit score, other than just pay, if you make your credit card payments late, is paying your cell phone billing. Anything like that can get reported. So it's very important to have a healthy credit life, that you pay all of your bills on time. And you might think, oh, well, I'll get the card, but I won't use it. But you can't build a credit score that way. You have to actually use the card. And believe it or not, it takes about 6 months to actually generate a score. So you have to use it, but you have to use it responsibly. And again, not until you're ready. Not until you're ready. Now, I have a whole chapter in my book on your first credit card because I think it's just so important, probably because I messed up so terribly when I first got credit cards. But the first credit card, this really just sets the stage for a great credit score to save money in other areas of your life. And when you have a good credit score, you'll get better credit card offers. You'll get offers of lower interest rates. And at some point, you might want to move up to rewards credit cards. And I'll tell you something. Last month, my husband and I went to Belize, which is in Central America, to celebrate our anniversary. And over half that trip was paid for with miles and points and cash back that I had been accumulating for quite a while because I've been planning this trip. So yes, I profit from my credit cards, but only because I use them responsibly. Now, I've already mentioned secured credit cards. That is one way to go. There are also student credit cards, and these are cards designed especially for students. So Discover is one of my favorite ones, the Discover Student credit card, Discover Student card, excuse me. And that's a really good one. I like it because they have a lot of education online for young people to get on to learn about credit. I mean, they're trying to be there with you as you learn about this. Now, that's a cashback card. So if you've got a little bit of credit in your background, or even good grades will help. I mean, that's some insider info right there. I've been told that good grades can help you. But they do check to make sure you're in college before you get one of these cards, because they give little special rates to the students. Okay, so maybe you can get a pretty decent rate. Okay, and it's a cashback card. Discover also has something called a cashback concierge. Okay, which is a fancy name for somebody that will answer the phone and help you with any problems, any questions you have about the cashback part of your card. Another one I like is from Capital One, the Journey Student Rewards card. That's another good one too. No foreign transaction fees on that card or on the Discover card. If you travel overseas, let's say you do a semester abroad, that's a really good thing to have in your pocket, because foreign transaction fees, believe it or not, they can cost up to about 3% of your total bill. So that's just a nice thing to have. Another thing that I do want to touch on before I take questions, are prepaid cards. Prepaid cards get a lot of publicity. Okay, you've probably heard of, a lot of your celebrities have them. Justin Bieber has been touting a card. There's that Young Money card. There's all kinds of cards out there with celebrities' names on them. Now, unfortunately, these cards, for the most part, are not a good idea because the fees are high. They're not credit cards. Okay, you might read that they have a credit building feature, but they do not. Take my word for this, they do not. You cannot build credit using a prepaid card. Now, you might decide that a prepaid card is just fine for you while you're in college, and it's kind of a way of budgeting, and I think that that's fine. The card I would recommend is the American Express Bluebird card, which you can get at Walmart. This card has basically no fees, very little, if any. And it's just it's designed to be a really good prepaid cards because there's a market for this. Some people, believe it or not, can't even get checking accounts because their credit's so bad. So there is a good market for prepaid cards, and American Express came out with this card to help people catch a break. But you can also use it while you're in college. Your parents can transfer funds from their American Express credit card onto your prepaid card. So it's fairly easy to do. But I just wanted to warn you about the prepaid cards because they're very tricky. The fees are sometimes hidden. They don't have the same regulation that credit cards do. So basically anything goes. Funny story, I was once reading the fine print of one of the prepaid cards. And the fine print was online. It was so tiny I couldn't even see it. Okay, so I had to keep magnifying it on my screen, and then when it got bigger, I realized it was actually sideways. So I actually had to almost lay down on my desk to actually read that fine print. So I could tell you more crazy stories about prepaid cards, but seriously, if you think you want to go that route, American Express Bluebird, and you don't develop credit with that card. So I just wanted to be really clear about that. Another way to develop credit with a card that's easy to get is a retail card. And I mentioned my Macy's card, which I lost, got taken away from me for bad behavior. But they're usually very easy to get, and some people use those to build credit. Now, I have to say, you have to be so careful with these cards because they can have interest rates between 25 and 30%. So when you're standing in line at your favorite store and they say, "Let's open this credit card and you'll get 15% off," that's very tempting, isn't it? But I urge you, say no. If you're interested, ask for the information for the card and take it home and read it. You want to make sure that there's a grace period. And by the way, I talked about the grace period, which is the amount of time you have before you have to pay interest on a purchase. Some cards don't have a grace period. Okay, that means as soon as you buy something, you start paying interest. I talk about these cards on my website. You can see my website address is beverlyharzog.com. I do card reviews. I will do reviews on request. So if you're ever thinking about a card, you can go to my website and request a review. I may already have it done. I also have a list of ranked secured credit cards, which these are great for kids in college or young adults out of college and needing to establish credit. I have them in a ranked order in tiers: top tier, middle tier, and bottom tier. Hopefully none of you will ever have to do the bottom tier. But that's on my website, and it's called The Best and Worst Secured Credit Cards. Okay, well, I think that we've covered a lot, and I would like to take questions if anybody has any. One thing that people always ask me is about credit card fees. What kind of fees do student cards have, annual fees? In general, student cards do not. Now, secured cards, and these are cards you get if you can't get an unsecured card. Secured cards sometimes have an annual fee. They're usually, it ranges from $29 to about $49. Some of the cards that I mentioned, I have a bottom tier on my list. Some of them have big fees, okay, even monthly maintenance fees. So you want to stay away from anything like that. But for someone just starting out, unless you have to get a secured card, and I even have some on my site that don't have annual fees. In general, a student card will not have an annual fee. Now, there's also a category that's in between somebody with zero or limited credit and someone with good credit, and that's called fair credit or average credit. And this is when you've got a little bit of credit. You know, maybe you were an authorized user in college on your parents' credit card. And so maybe you're ready for an unsecured credit card. That means it's not secured, by the way. You don't have to do a deposit. Most cards are unsecured. You know, maybe you're ready for one of those. Now, for that category, I would recommend Capital One's cards. They're very good about giving young people a chance. And they've got several cards out there that are designed just for people with fair credit. Okay, how do I help? Here's a good question, a great question. How do I help my son establish a good credit score? Okay, the first thing to do is decide if your son is ready for a credit card. And like I said, there are ways to establish a good credit score without getting a credit card. You know, I mentioned co-signing. That's a little bit sticky situation, okay? If you think your son is responsible and you also have good credit, because see, this could go both ways. Now, if the parent misses a payment, that can actually mess up the child's credit score. And so the joint account thing, well, the co-sign thing is very, very tricky in that regard. But if you're both on the same page and you both feel comfortable with it, then that's perfectly fine to go ahead and do that. That is totally totally fine. Another way to do this is you know, an authorized user, and I mentioned that too. You know, that's a great way. Again, it works both ways though. If the main account user misses a payment, it impacts the the authorized user on that account. The good news is once the authorized user is removed from the account, all of that negative info will go away. But most parents are just great about their credit. When you're to the point where you're asking questions about what you know, how to help my son develop good credit, I know you're on the ball. Okay, so you know, those are a couple of ways to do that. I mentioned the secured credit card. You know, basically it goes back to the question of how ready is my son for a credit card. You know, if he is the kind of kid who has a checking account and manages to keep everything in line with that, uses a debit card, checking account debit card responsibly, then he might be ready. But you know, there are several ways to go about that. So, great question. Thank you. Let's see. How do you say no when you have a limited spending amount and are tempted to buy something, but you already reached your limit? Okay, this fits right into many of the mistakes I made when I was young. It is hard. It's very hard. And I would say if you're at that point, take the credit cards out of your wallet. Okay, some people say put it in a block of ice, but anyone who's resourceful can melt that ice in a hurry. I have a friend who once put hers in a jar of peanut butter, and you got to be really motivated to go in that jar of peanut butter and get your credit card. But I would say, you know, you put away the cards. Now, one thing I kept doing, and this was a big mistake too, is as I reached my limits, I kept asking for a credit limit increase. And this was a few decades ago, and you know, it was the economy was doing great and banks wanted you to spend. All right, so they kept, until they realized I couldn't pay my bills, they kept giving me an increase. But you know, it's difficult. It takes a lot of self-discipline, and all I can say is that once you can get yourself to forego an impulse purchase, you build confidence that you can do it. Okay. And I will tell you, you know, it sounds like you already have debt. And once you start paying down that debt, you're going to feel great. And it just, you get momentum paying down debt. You really do. the lower it goes, the more excited you get, the more committed you get to your to keeping a limit on your spending. And you're not alone, okay? There are so many ways you can get help online. You can learn so much about things. And the National Foundation for Credit Counseling is a place where I recommend people go if they just feel like they're drowning, okay? And getting help with a credit counselor, that does not impact your credit score at all. Okay, that's really important to remember. And there's no shame in asking for help. Ask your parents for help first. That if you're in such a pickle that you don't see any way out and you just have this humongous balance, check into some credit counseling. You can send me, get on my website and contact me, or you have your parents do that. And I have a few agencies that I recommend. I even will set people up with a company, and then the credit counselor will reach out to you directly, and I step away. But I believe in credit counseling when you need it. Okay, are there any more questions? I'm happy to answer them. And on my website, like I said, I answer reader questions there too. So if you think of anything at all you want to ask, and I can do this anonymously, just use your first name, or I can just use no name at all if you really want to be anonymous. But let me tell you, if you've got a question, a credit card question, chances are a lot of other people have that same question. So, any more questions that I can help you with? All right, well, thank you so much. And my book is available on Amazon.com, and also it'll be available in bookstores on Monday. It's the official launch date. So thank you so much for coming to my session, and I had a great time talking to you.